Hello and welcome to the Walk-Off, everybody. I'm Scott Belford. We have a very special episode for you today. We actually had things happening in Blue Jay land the last 24 hours, so I think it's important to get an emergency episode out there and break down what we've seen. So excited to have back on the show. Long toss aficionado, but we're going one-on-one with Baseball Jen. Welcome back to the Walk-Off, my friend.
Good to be here. I'm glad we have some news to talk about.
Well,
Something happened.
something actually happened, and I mean, it's nice to not just be watching other teams bolster their lineup. Whether Andre Jimenez is the guy or not is yet to be seen, but it is. Before we get negative or positive on this one was surprising. Did
Yes.
this caught you off guard as well, I'm guessing?
Yes. I was not expecting them to pick up another middle infielder for sure. I thought that was an area that had been solidified one way or another.
Yeah.
And really was expecting the first move to be an outfielder since they lost out on Soto.
Hmm.
I was expecting them to pivot and find an outfielder to fill that gap. So for them to get yet another infield guy, and in particular to get one that is a defense
Defense
first guy,
first.
such exciting brand of baseball. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I don't think anybody was expecting that.
Some interesting stuff to go over with this trade. Number one, Spencer Horwitz traded for Andre Jimenez and Nick Sandlin, who is actually a pretty
Mhm.
intriguing arm when you start to look into him. Crazy whiff stuff. Doesn't throw overly hard. He's topping out at around 94, averaging 92. Could fit in nicely in an area where the Blue Jays need arms. So the bullpen does get a little bit thicker here. What was your thought on Spencer Horwitz being moved? He did seem like a guy who was kind of an odd man out, even when he was the best hitter on this team. There was still that sense of like, well, where does he fit long term?
Yeah, he didn't really have like an actual position to play, right? So is he your DH? And did the team want to really lock themselves into having a single guy be their DH?
Because they
History says
really
that they
shoehorned him
don't.
into second last year. Like,
Right, absolutely. Just trying to find a place for him to play. And so I agree, even though he was their best offensive player for certain stretches of the year, and looked like a guy.
mhm.
With the plethora of infielders and Vladdy at first, and assuming Bo's sitting there at shortstop, where were you going to spend, or where were you going to play Spencer Horwitz, right? And so um, it hurts. It's a bad look for part of the fan base in the sense that they really liked Horowitz.
Mhm.
And when a guy performs well and then is traded, eyebrows are sometimes raised. But I do think, to your point, there wasn't exactly a solid role for him on this team. So, and that's the one thing, that's the one area of depth that they have to trade from.
It is. It is. And I mean, that's the other thing to take a look at here in this trade is we don't know what the big plan is yet. And I mean, I want to give this front office enough credit to truly believe there is more stuff coming down the pipeline. And there literally has to be. If this team is going to contend like they say it is in 2025, which I'm still very doubtful of, but let me tell you right now, this is a very much unfinished product. And I know we've said this last year and then watched them just nibble around the edges, but I truly believe more is coming here. And it could be surprising what goes down. Now, again, this is all speculation, and I'm curious your thoughts. But the thing with Jimenez that is very interesting is that he does have term, right? So he's under contract until 2025. And yes, three-time Gold Glover, Platinum Glove winner, one of the best middle infielders in baseball, also plays a pretty darn good shortstop. Obviously, one of the biggest question marks with this organization right now is their two pillars, their supposed generational talents and the supposed core of this team, both expiring contracts, in Bo Bichette playing shortstop, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at first base. Interesting, they moved Spencer Horwitz, who a natural first baseman, but also interesting that they did double down on shortstop, where Bo Bichette could maybe even could. I guess my question for you, Jen, is could we see the craziest thing happen and Bo Bichette moved before the season?
I think that would be a very tough sell to fans unless they have really added to this lineup ahead of that. So can they go out and get, for instance, Santander? Can they get Alonso? Can they add to their pitching rotation? Like, can they build what appears to be a much, much better team that even if they traded a fan favorite like Bo, people can still see the blueprint for success, right? People will still want to buy tickets and go to the ballpark. People will still want to turn on the game each and every night. And so it's a very difficult question to answer because we have absolutely no idea what the plan is with regards to this front
We
office.
don't.
Right? I think we can all agree that this is it for the front office if they are not successable this season by whatever measure you're going to, look at success,
Sure.
whatever that
Third
is.
wild card. Yes.
But, we've talked about this before, right? Like, I don't think that they have any intent on signing Bo to an extension. And I don't think Bo has any intent on signing an extension if one was offered. And so if you can extract maximum value, and people will argue, well, he had a terrible season last season, so he's actually at his lowest value. I don't know if you're.
I don't know if he is either.
I don't know that he is because any value he lost with his performance last year, you may get back in the fact that you will have him for a full season, right? You can work with him in spring training. If you're the team trading for him, you can work with him out of the gate in spring training and have a full season of whatever it is he might have to offer.
If you were to just take the emotion out of it, take my knowledge out of it, and were to just tell me, Scott, there is a guy. He led the league in hits in 2021. He led the league in hits in 2022. He finished third for hits in 2023 and would have beat the other two guys in front of him had he played a full season. He was injured for 3 weeks. Then he played about half of a season after that, was injured for a lot of it, and had the most external noise of his career surrounding him and was a non-factor. Would you take him the next year? And I don't need names. I don't need numbers. I'm just going to be like, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. A guy who leads the league in hits almost 3 years in a row and then half the season was injured with a bunch of shit going on in his life. I'll take a flyer on that. And I don't, when I say flyer, by the way, I don't mean like a discounted, would you just, I'm not saying an Andre Jimenez, right? Like that's a little bit of a project. Big upside, 26 years old, 4 years of control. There is a lot to like with Jimenez, but Bo Bichette's a different animal.
Bo Bichette has the pedigree. He has been touted as a talent or true talent with the bat for years, and he's still extremely young. And so any team looking at him would say that there's an awful lot of raw material there to work with. And you have to assume that last year was an anomaly, right? Based on the 3 seasons before that. You have to assume that he will have a better 2025 than he did 2024. And he will want to, right? I'm sure that he will do everything it takes to be healthy and to perform well because he's coming up on free agency, right? He will be looking at his next big contract. And
Mhm.
so there is a lot of potential upside, right? I mean, I guess that's actually an understatement. So there's a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of upside to trading for Bo Bichette.
I think the age thing too, too many people don't give enough credit to how young he is. 26 years old. And that's even what we were talking about with Jimenez. Would you say it's safe to say that Jimenez obviously is the successor to Bobichette? Like this was part of this move, correct?
Yes.
Like to cover their asses long term.
Yes, I think the biggest criticism of Bo Bichette has been his defense at shortstop, right?
Hmm.
And so I feel like the front office has gone and taken care of that issue, whether Bo is injured this season or is traded or whatever the case might be, or just leaves in free agency. They've got that position solidified with a better defensive player.
You know what was really interesting? Old friend, right? Former first baseman for the Blue Jays, Rowdy Tellez, played first for Pittsburgh all year last year, moved on. And maybe some people didn't even hear this, but the Guardians flipped Horwitz hours later to the Pirates for 3 pitching prospects. And it's an intriguing little ripple in this whole thing is that when he went to Cleveland, my first thought was, why do they need Horowitz though? That seems redundant with Naylor at first for another year, and obviously they've got options at second, and I mean I could see him fitting in there, but to watch Spencer Horowitz play his natural position and be given some real runway in Pittsburgh, I think we could see a pretty decent little season out of the kid.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, it was funny because I on and off social media and, I go to bed and he's on one team and I wake up and he's on another and I'm like, what the heck happened?
Yeah.
But, clearly there was value there, right? Teams want his services and are willing to give up guys to get him.
Jen, with Andre Jimenez, he is bringing some aspects to this team that they did not have before. I mean, he would have led 2024 Blue Jays in stolen bases. He's probably good for 30 bags a year without too much work. And this is a guy who wasn't getting on base enough. This is where I look at his on base percentage, and I'm just pulling it up here. His 2024 on base percentage. Come on, Scott, get to this faster. Okay, so 335, which is not ideal.
Mhm.
I bring this up because he is pretty darn good on the base path, and George Springer, probably not the guy you want hitting leadoff.
Right.
Now, I'm not suggesting that we move George out of leadoff to have another guy literally do exactly what we watched him do in 2024. But do you think there's a world where we can watch Jimenez rebound a little bit offensively? I mean, people do forget this was a guy who was an all-star, showed a bunch of power, and was a real whiz with the bat in 2022. And I know that he's 2 years removed, and I'm well aware that last year his WRC plus was around an 85.
Yeah.
If we can get his OBP up to, say, 360. Would you be all right with a slap hitter, ground ball guy, getting on base type of dude? Would you be all right with Jimenez in the leadoff? Do you think this is part of that thinking?
Yes, with the caveat that they add power. There's got to be power behind him.
Yes.
So to me, this move in a vacuum doesn't look very good, right? Because they've added what they already have,
Yeah.
essentially, right? And that is not what the failure of this team was last year. So in a vacuum, the move does not look very good. Now, if they go and add a couple of power bats to round out that lineup, and now you've got this slap hitter who can run the bases, hitting ahead of Vladimir and company. Now you've really got something, right? Like now you can see how the puzzle pieces actually fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have to, as a fan, hope, and I would assume that this is what the front office has in mind. Can they execute? That's that's the other question, right?
Yes.
Is it, can they actually pull it off? And I don't know. Like that remains to be seen, right? And you know who I want. You know who I want. You know who I want. Scott, who
I
do I
mean,
want?
you're not alone. Teoscar Hernandez would fit in very, very well with this team, obviously. And I mean, there has been a Teoscar-sized hole since he left that has never been addressed. And I mean, you and I have been screaming about this for 24 months now that this team needs some power and a legitimate cleanup hitter. And I don't know if anyone's listening because I know we're not alone in screaming this into the void. But I think that the front office has been, if nothing else, they've got to be reassessing what they had as just what they had. They need to be reassessing what they had, right? Because they were so confident that we're going to see positive regression. We're going to see people going back to their norms, and they rolled back in 2024 what we saw in 2023, and it did not work. In fact, epic failure. And so I would hope that they take some of these lessons to heart. And I mean, we've seen them move on from their amateur director of scouting, right? Farrell's gone, Tremuta's in. We watched their hitting coach, move on from Hag, bring in Popkins. We watched them, their pitching development staff has had some new people pop in. So we are seeing new voices in areas that were weak. And so I really do hope that the fact that they're addressing that means that they did do a big reevaluation of what they thought was right and have realized some of their wrongs. And dear God, Jen, if they don't, could be some dark days ahead.
Absolutely. And my biggest question is, at what point did they realize they were out on Soto? Because the initial reports were that they had offered something like 730 or
Mm-hmm.
760 or something insane like that. And that initial report was not true. They stuck to whatever they felt their valuation was, which I believe was below 700 million. So I'm just curious, at what point did they know that they were out of the game, and have they had serious talks with Teoscar, with Santander, with anybody,
With
right?
Vladdy.
What, okay, so that's a whole other conversation we got to have.
And let's
That's a whole
dive in
other.
because this literally opened it up beautifully. Because I'm going to ask you a few questions here that is speculation, and we obviously don't know the answers to. But I do wonder if you're Vladimir Guerrero Jr. watching your good friend Juan Soto, who has zero ties to the organization, get offered, let's say, $685 million. You know what? I know we don't know the actual number, but the fact the Jays were there right till the last day or two does say that they were in that realm. All right. So
Yep.
let's, in fact, you know what? Let's make the math easy. Let's say they did the same thing they did with Otani. It was a $700 million offer. Then they don't even ask you to go to the meetings, right? Which right away was something Ross said, and I can take that as two ways. Respectful for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., that you don't wish to put him in the mud with this. Also weird that, is it just because you don't wish to put him in the mud with this because you do not have an offer for him, right? And then lastly, there's no way if I'm Vladimir Guerrero Jr. that I'm not going to free agency because I just watched what a competitive market with teams that need hitting can get you. Like before Juan Soto signed, Jen, I would have said that at the best, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. makes 400 million
Mm-hmm.
over a 10 to 12-year contract.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm at the point where I'm like, you know what? It's going to start with a five. It's absolutely going to start with a five. And who knows how crazy it could get. I'm not saying he's going to be in Soto's realm, but I would be more surprised if it started with a three than if it started with a six.
So on Soto, right? So as I just said, the front office stuck with their valuation, and the front office had told them they could go above that, right? The
Mm-hmm.
money was there. I don't know exactly how much money, but they could have put in a bigger offer and they stuck with their valuation. And I think something we know about this front office is that that's what they do. They have a particular value in mind for a player and they do not go above it. And so, you could argue that that is good business. But I have a feeling
It's
that
a
if
great way to always finish second, I'll tell you that much.
right. And so if you apply that to Vlad and they have a particular value in mind that they will not move off of, then there's absolutely no way that deal is getting done. Right? There's absolutely no way that deal is getting done. And I can tell you, I would bet my bank account that there were conversations between Vlad and Soto during all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would bet that there were, informal little conversations, and who knows what way those went. It could have
Sure.
been, it
See
could
you
have
in New York.
exactly right. Get yours.
Yeah.
Wait it out. This is great. This is fun. And yeah, I mean, I've been saying for the past year as well, like if you're Vlad, why would you this close to free agency and you're seeing these crazy numbers get tossed around? Why would you not want to see what the other 29 teams think of you? I don't
Mm-hmm.
care that he has said he wants to stay in Toronto. That means nothing to me. That means nothing to me until you sign on the dotted line, right? Because there are
Mm-hmm.
a lot of other great cities out there and you have friends around the league. And so, sure, I don't doubt that he likes Toronto. That I'm not saying that he's insincere in that. But why would you not want to see what the other 29 teams are going to offer you?
Jen, do you think it's possible that Vladdy has lost some faith in this front office? Like, I'm just wondering where the players are at because I mean, obviously, everyone's just human, and you look at what the sentiment is amongst this fan base. Even myself, who I swear to God, I try so hard to stay reasonable, but it's so hard to not have some bitterness and dislike for this front office, right? Like, even the Andre Jimenez thing, I really was like, listen, take your front office out of this, take your feelings out of this, and just look at what happened. They got a 3-time Gold Glover, a former All-Star, a 26-year-old, one of the best middle infielders defensively in baseball, and they did so with a prospect that was drafted in the 24th round where there was no whole room for him on the team. Like, if you just say that without all of the stuff I already know, I would be pretty happy with that, right? But it's really hard to be like, yes, I understand that this is still a picture that isn't finished, but my God, I'm so sick of pitching and defense. Maybe had you fed me a power hitter first, I would be a lot more reasonable about this.
Last year was so demoralizing. Let's be honest. That was
Yeah.
a demoralizing season. And we were angry just about the off season. Like going into the season, we didn't think that they had done enough. And it just spiraled from there. And so, I think that fans absolutely have a right to be a little critical and to be a little concerned and to not have faith, right? And everybody goes about things different ways, but absolutely I can see why fans would be a little gun shy after last year. And that's not to say that this front office has never done anything good. That's far from the truth.
Hmm.
I praised this front office for quite a few years on this show. And it's really only been the past 2 years that I've become
Since
quite
the pivot,
quite
since that
critical.
GD pivot.
Yeah, and so I feel that yeah, if add something that we know the team needs, right? That's the whole point,
And
right?
I know the order of things is irrelevant in the long run when you step back, but you're right, Jen. Like, it is so hard to swallow more of the same.
It is. It is. And I have a real concern because I did see somebody on X post that based on whatever Shai Davidi had written, it sounded like they might be close to the top of their spending right now. In which case, how do they get done what they need to get done? Now, who knows if that's true, right? But, these little pieces of information that are coming out here or there don't exactly give confidence. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it won't all fall together, because I absolutely agree. We got to see what this team looks like on first day of spring training,
And I
right? We
will say
cannot
when
judge
it,
it right
I
now.
agree, you can't judge it quite yet, even though God, I want to. And I will say budgetary wise that there is a lot of money coming off the books in 2025 and almost all of the money off the books in 2026. Another thing that made a lot of sense with the contract of Andre Jimenez, which is 10 million then this year, 15 and then 23 and 23. So,
Backloaded, yeah.
you are kind of at the back end loaded there, which is perfect. And I'm sure there are ways to do that again in numerous ways because if you are going to bolster this lineup, it is a deep free agent year, even though it's an expensive free agent year, right? And so to sleep on 2024 and then try and bolster next year, if you look at next year's free agency, you know who's at the top? It's Vladdy and
Hmm.
Kyle Tucker. And then honestly, Jen,
It's a
mid.
cliff.
It's
Yep.
mid, right?
Yep.
And which is fine. Every team needs mid guys. But if you expect to if you want a Corbin Burns, you need to get Corbin Burns now.
Yep.
And we just watched the New York Yankees go out and get freed. They added Garrett Crochet in Boston. So we just had two new aces coming to the AL East.
And every ad that the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Orioles or make, every addition that makes them better makes the Blue Jays worse by comparison,
Mm-hmm.
right? Until, like you said, until the Jays go out and add a Corbin Burns or add Teoscar Hernandez or add whomever, the disparity between the two teams, or the Jays and the teams, the rest of the teams in the league, that gap gets that much bigger, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think that's another thing that fans are looking at. But if we go back to Vlad, and if they can't extend him, which I think you and I agree they're not going to,
Mm-hmm.
right? If he walks in free agency and signs elsewhere, how big is the hole now? Right?
And
How do you
that's
fill that Vladdy size hole? Because they're still trying to fill that Teoscar size hole you mentioned earlier.
And this is where, and I mean, it was a pretty depressing mailbag yesterday because Adam and I, after answering a bunch of questions, pretty much hit a wall where we were like, yeah, maybe we got to tear it down. Because you start doing the math of like, all right, we add an Anthony Santander, great bat, switch hitter, something this team has not had in literally
Years.
years. And to have a tool like that would be so great. You're going to need to pay top dollar. You're probably looking 110 million over 5 years. You definitely need another top end starter to get this thing rolling for 2025. I think Corbin Burns is the guy if you're going to add that way. But then if you look at this team and who's leaving, is this team any good in 2026 with Anthony Santander as the lone offensive cog? And I'm not saying you can't bolster on the go and so on and so forth. And who knows if there's trades at the deadline. I mean, we watched Jack Flaherty get traded by the Tigers and then them go on to the division series, right? So there's no guarantee in baseball. We could watch Bichette traded at the deadline and this team still compete. Who knows? But it does feel bleak when you start to get into the expiring contracts that are coming up, the two pillars that have been sold as the core of this team long term, and it's just not the case anymore. One last thing here before we move on, Jen. I'm really curious your thoughts on third base. This is still a pretty major hole, correct? I
Mhm.
love Ernie Clement, but this is still, I'm not saying they need to go out and get Alex Bregman, but this is a place that they really should be concerned about, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Ideally, they would have They would improve over Ernie Clement at third base. Absolutely. Um, Now, my question to you is, would you consider moving Vlad to third? Because I personally would not.
So I'll say this. Jimenez at shortstop does give you a little bit of leeway at third base. I don't know if it gives you Vladimir Guerrero Jr. leeway. And I mean that with respect. This is a dude who was moved off of third 4 years ago, everybody. We watched him play admirably there for what, 10 games last year? Are we expecting him to go in there and play 155 games? That's a pretty big ask, in my opinion. I'm not saying he couldn't, but what I am saying is there is going to be some growing pains that probably should have freaking happened 4 years ago. But, anyways, that's another story for another day. So, my question then would be, to make it worth it, why are we moving him?
Right.
If this is for Pete Alonso, I would definitely be more open to it, right? If we're bringing in a big bad man to hit bombs, sure.
So I see bringing in Pete Alonso as DH. You keep Vlad at first. I don't know what you do with third right now. And then Alonso's your first baseman if Vladdy walks at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
season, which I think we're kind of assuming is going to be the outcome, like
Yes.
the likely outcome. So that's the way that I see it. I just see moving Vlad to third, which I've just seen a lot of people suggest happen. Just a recipe for potential injury,
Yeah.
right? We've seen some excellent third basemen in this city get very, very injured. And it basically cost them, the last couple of years of their career.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see that being in Vlad's best interest, even if he wants to do it. I don't know that it's in his best interest, except perhaps financially.
Jen, if you had your choice, are you an Alonso lady or are you pro Bregman? Like, what do you think is the better? If this front office is gonna blow their brains out spending, what direction would you rather see them go?
I really want Alonso.
Yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
feel the same way. I don't know if I'm being biased because I just don't like Bregman, but I do think that's the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think, like you said, I think you just stick him in the middle of that lineup and let him do what he does. And the protection for Vlad or Vlad protecting him, like I just think as a tandem, that would be quite the duo.
Yeah, I could handle a Jimenez, Bichette, Guerrero, Alonso 1, 2, 3, 4. That's for sure.
Yeah.
With leadoff,
Hmm.
do you give Jimenez a chance over Springer, like long term? Like, do you let him run with it for a month before you start panicking?
Let Springer run with it for a month, you mean? Or let
Jimenez.
Jimenez?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you need to have that conversation with Springer during spring training,
Yeah.
and let him know, dude, we're we're gonna start off right off the bat.
We're fluid.
Yay, we are open to the possibility of the
Yeah.
flexibility.
The most Ross Atkins answer, right? Just like, oh, some of those quotes from
Um,
the winter meetings just cracked me up.
he just that's a whole separate conversation. We could yeah. Just stop talking. Use fewer words. Use fewer words. The more words you use, the worse it comes across.
It
Um,
really does. Yeah.
it really, really does. Um, I think they have to have that conversation, like day one of spring training with George Springer and just say, this is a direction that we're going to go in. This is what we're going to try. We hope you're on board because we're doing it anyways.
Hmm. I mean, it's not like, honestly, in a perfect world, I think Andre Jimenez should be hitting ninth, but
Yes.
this is the Toronto Blue Jays, and this is not a perfect world. So I kind of feel like the thing we should expect is that Andre Jimenez is given a shot at the leadoff
The
spot.
idea of a speedy guy at the top of the lineup is definitely appealing. So, and as you said earlier, if he can improve his offense even a little bit, get that bat on the ball, then then I think you really do have something to work with. Again, if they add some power hitters, this only works if
Mm-hmm.
they add two big bats. They have to.
Speaking of power hitters, this is the quote I was thinking of here. So Hazel May asked Ross Atkins if there was interest in a possible reunion with Teoscar Hernandez, and this was his response. I love this. We are definitely interested in figuring out a way for that to be a possibility. like, it's like, what a fun way to say maybe. Like, like you took a one-word answer and you made it into a full sentence.
Figure out a way to make it a possibility. Like even making like
Definitely, we are definitely interested.
definitely maybe
Definitely
on
interested
the
in figuring
fence.
out a way to possibly do this. Just like what? Oh man.
I get that he can't show his cards, right?
Of
Like he can't
course.
sound too enthusiastic and he certainly can't sound too, disinterested. He has to kind of walk that line as a negotiator. But good grief. Like
Hmm.
again, the fewer words the better, Ross.
So Rule 5 draft was today, and the Blue Jays actually took an arm, which isn't that shocking. But one thing for everyone to remember about Rule 5 draft is when you take a guy, they need to stick with your lineup the whole year. So the Blue Jays selected right handed pitcher Angel Bastardo, great name, by the way, from the Red Sox in the Rule 5 draft. Now, Bastardo, here is the rundown on him from Keegan Matheson, and this does make it a little bit more interesting. So he says Blue Jays assistant GM Mike Muroff tells us they were drawn to the upside of Angel Bastardo's fastball, which sits an average of 97 miles an hour. And this was from his final start before Tommy John surgery. So that is the asterisk here because he could start or pitch in a bulk role when healthy, which probably won't be till late season.
If I remember correctly, he had like the partial surgery.
The partial surgery. So it wasn't a full on TJ, it was the arm brace thing or whatever they do, which is normally about 10 to 12 months. Again, this is person to person, human to human. We've seen guys back after 8 months. We've seen guys also with even with the brace take a full 18 months. So my question to you is less about what this means or what this is, but this is more of the Blue Jays probably being like, listen, we like this guy's arm. By the time he's ready to go, we're probably going to know if we're a playoff team or not. And if they're not and they suck, why not throw them in the bullpen for the end of August and September and continue to suffer through? And you have another arm going into 2026. And if you're actually competitive and you've pulled off the impossible and threaded the needle into contention, who cares if you got to send him back, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's a low risk. It's really a low risk move.
It's the most Atkins move I could think of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we need to talk about that bullpen.
We do need to talk about that bullpen. Um, so Sandlin was added, not a
Yep.
bad arm.
Nope.
Jimmy Garcia was a
Mhm.
signing yesterday that we have not brought up yet. And despite the fact we haven't brought it up yet, it is a big deal. It was a big move. I think this was a definite necessary add by the Blue Jays. And my question to you is, Jen, Jordan Romano or Jimmy Garcia, who do you pick? And does it look like what we are seeing right now at a Ross Atkins?
Who do you pick? So I find it really interesting that they walked away from Romano at a particular dollar value, and he ended up getting more as a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if the Blue Jays know something about the health of his arm that the rest of the league would not be privy to somehow, like just in terms of maybe watching or discussing the recovery process with him. Um, but clearly, teams are looking at Jordan Romano and thinking, this guy, we're willing to take the risk on him at this price because of what we know he can do when he is at his peak. So it's a really tricky call. Um,
Because that's the
I
only
am,
thing I could wrap my head around is that,
yeah,
like, they either grossly misread the market, in which case, fuck. And if they didn't grossly misread the market, it means that they had already had Romano's money earmarked,
yes,
and it would make sense, being it's the same price
yep.
at Jimmy Garcia, and that's why I phrased the question that way, right? It's like, was this a financial choice? Do you think it was one or the other?
I think what was it, 2 years? 2 years of Garcia at
Two
15
years,
million?
15 mil, 7.5 a year.
7.5 a year. So I guess they're looking at him and thinking the uncertainty of Romano's arm and how long it will take him to get back to form, and then does he suffer a relapse injury in the future? Do you really want to take the risk on that? I think they went with the the lower risk
Mm-hmm.
uh, option versus maybe the higher upside option.
Yeah, I think that's probably the safe way of putting it, is that they were evaluating the floor compared to the ceiling, and the floor with Jimmy just a little bit better.
And I really like Garcia. Like
Me
I'm
too.
glad that they came
Me
to a
too.
deal with him.
Yeah.
And clearly, they do need to make sure that that bullpen is not a weak link next year. And losing Romano automatically made it worse. But that's my kind of take on it, right? For $7.5 million, who are you going to give it to? You're going to give it to the guy that you know is healthy.
Chad Green, Jimmy Garcia, Eric Swanson currently kind of pegged as the high leverage guys in the back end of that bullpen. I don't think it's enough. Are
No,
you you're in the same boat?
I
Do you
think they
want to
need a
see?
legitimate closer.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
I understand the closer by committee mentality. Damn, it would be nice to see a high end guy at the back end, though.
It really would be. I think having, you see the teams with the really strong bullpens, and you know that if you can't score on that team, you know, in the first 5 innings, first 6 innings, it's
Hmm.
lights out from there because of who's in that back end of the bullpen, right? And wouldn't it be nice to have a back end of the bullpen like that? And you know who your closer is, and they do that light show, and the music and all that comes on, and the crowd gets excited, and the dude comes in and 9.5 times out of 10 does actually close it out.
And
Like
you're
that
like,
is
thank God Ross brought us Devin Williams.
but like I completely agree with you. I think the closer by committee just there's just too much there that can go wrong. I think a lot of these guys, baseball players, athletes in general, are creatures of habit. And I don't think people realize just how much they are creatures of habit,
Hmm.
and the warm up routines that they have, and the mental stuff that they do to get ready to go in. And there's a difference between knowing if you're going in the seventh or the eighth or the ninth, or you're going to go in if the team is down by 2 runs in this particular scenario, or whatever it is. You know your role, and you can sort of plan accordingly, if you will, right? There is something to be said for that.
I agree 100%. I think it goes for position players as well. And it's why it drives me so nuts when they take these guys and they've got a set position and they're like, you know what, we're gonna Kevin you all over this field, right? Like we're gonna
Is that a verb now?
it's become a verb. I'm verbing it. Yeah. Last thing I wanted to bounce off you here before we wrap this up, Jen, and for everyone listening too. We're doing a big Christmas long toss on Sunday. Jen's going to be there. Joel's going to be there. Adam is there. We've got Johnny Eaton holding down the fort as the producer. Maybe a couple other surprise pop-ins. We'll see what's going on there. But that'll be Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And looking forward to having our roundtable chat there. But I will leave you with the draft yesterday, where there was all the excitement, right? Blue Jays have a 7.5% chance of first overall. Ethan Holiday, bloodlines, hook it to the Blue Jays veins. And you know what we didn't talk about was there was an equal chance of them dropping spots, and they did. So they went from fifth to eighth. I don't think it's that big of a deal, especially when you
No.
watch the the baseball draft and realize even those guys picked 1, 2, 3 are probably going to spend a year or two in development before we get to even put our eyes on them at the big league level. A lot of times longer than that. But, and this is a big but, my friend, player development has sucked. It's been like literally the bane of this front office's existence. They cannot get it right. They came in here shit talking AA and his farm system and have yet to deliver on, and we've said this many times on Long Toss for years now, Jen, the waves of talent, the waves that we were expecting. We've only got a few ripples. And we've talked about it already during the show that they have made some player development personnel changes, which at least, in my opinion, means they at least feel like it's a problem. Right? Like,
But doing it in like what might be their final season at the helm, right? Like just feels like you're just a day late and a dollar short here, Ross. And, not again to be overly critical, but I think that that is the biggest failing of this front office because they were hypercritical of the state of the farm system when they took over. And as you said, Mark Shapiro promised to restock the farm, homegrown talent, player development. We'll have waves of talent to fill out our roster or to trade, whatever the case might be, but we will have a sustainable farm system. And they have utterly failed to deliver that. And so for anybody who, wants to, be positive and this and that is the one thing that I think you have to point your finger at and say, it's been 9 years,
mhm.
9 years, and they have failed miserably at being able to deliver on that one promise. And this is why they can't trade for different guys, right? This is why it took Horwitz to get Jimenez, for instance, right? Because they don't have anybody else. And so how do you add at a trade deadline, for instance, when you don't have waves of talent to trade? I think falling in the draft, I don't think falling from fifth to eighth matters that much, but I think
Mhm.
it was just one of those like, signs, right? Like, it could go this way or it could go that way. And of course it went that way.
It felt like
And,
we were being kicked while we were down, kind
right.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. It almost was like just like almost like, a premonition of things to come perhaps for fans. But again, I don't think choosing fifth or choosing eighth matters that much.
Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely not, 10 being we are going to the World Series. How confident are you that this front office can pull off a little magic in this offseason and actually make this and field a competitive team?
Right now, I'm sitting at about a 3.
Okay.
Um, I just don't see it all coming together. And I
Hmm.
really hope I'm wrong. And I am not sitting here being negative for the sake
Yeah.
of being negative. I just don't see how they have the money to address all of the needs that they want to. Um, and I know we can talk about that special pool of money for guys like Soto and Shohei versus what they actually end up spending on guys. But I don't think you can call this ownership cheap, right? I really don't.
No. No, I agree with that. In
right?
fact, that is one narrative that is growing a little tiresome anytime I hear it.
Yeah.
You know, I was literally at the butcher shop right before we did this, and the guy there saw my Jays jacket, and right away he was like, "That team never spends money; they keep losing." And I'm like, "That's just because they were prepared to spend $700 million." Like,
Well, and there's a difference between ownership and what they're willing to spend versus what the front office is valuing players at and how much
yes.
they're willing to offer, right? That doesn't line up. So, who are you who are you taking, pointing the finger at when it comes to this, right? And
I'm
so
just saying, Pittsburgh fans look at what the Jays spend and they wish. They dream of
absolutely.
it.
But I'm still not over last off season. I'm not over not, the
Yeah.
trade deadline of 2023. Like I'm not over it. And you've got the same guys making the decisions. And so I don't feel confident that when all is said and done, we're going to look at the team rolling into 2025 and feel like we can be at the top of the division.
Hmm.
I just don't feel like we're going to be there. I'm more than happy to be wrong. And I w-
Me too.
and if they go out and they get Pete Alonso and they get Teoscar Hernandez and they get Corbin Burns, I will be celebrating along with everybody else. If they get
Hmm.
two of the three,
Yes.
Santander, cool, fine, right? These names that we've tossed about all show, go get two of them. At least go get two of them. And I think you'll see a lot of really satisfied fans.
And you'll see fans where that number goes from 3 to 8, like, and by the way, three is a very, very fair number because I was going to sit here and boldface lie and say 5, even though I'm a 4. Like, like, like I get it. And Jimenez intrigued me. I like it if everything else falls together, right?
Yes.
If this just becomes another redundancy, yes, I will be here with everyone else in June being like, what the hell?
I can see what they might be envisioning here. I really
Hmm.
can. I can absolutely see how the pieces could fall into place, but you got to get those other pieces.
And you know what? We talked about this at the beginning of the show. This front office has not had, I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it, a fuck it moment, right? Where they're just like, you know what? Yes, we're in it neck and neck with another organization for a player we target, for a player we want. And we have now hit a level where crossing that line makes us uncomfortable. All I can say is get uncomfortable for one freaking time in your career, Ross, because this is it. Like now is the time.
Quite literally, right? Like his tenure with this team, this is the last hurrah,
He
right?
hasn't done a good enough job to get a job elsewhere.
No, I don't think he has either. So this really is it. Like in every fathomable way, this is the end of the line. This is do or die. You either field a team that is competitive, like actually truly competitive, and sure, you might lose out to the Yankees in a wild card game or whatever the heck it is, but you are a team that everybody sees as being a competitor,
Mhm.
and the games are exciting and you've addressed the needs of the team, right? But you cannot possibly have another, like, I wouldn't even say last season was mid. Last season was awful. But
Awful.
you cannot have a mid season and then also watch your homegrown superstar walk out the
Walk
door.
away
You
for
can't
nothing
survive
for
that.
comp picks. Yeah.
No, you can't survive that. And so, for his own sake, Alex Anthopoulos, I'm not saying they should bring him back, fans, but Alex Anthopoulos had that screw it moment, right?
Hmm.
And he kind of knew he was on his way out.
Hmm.
And so he did his mic drop moments. And Ross has to
And
play it
what
the
a
same
mic
way.
drop.
I'm on the way out. I might be on the way out here. I'm going out with a bang.
Yeah. And he did. Jen, Always a pleasure. This was the best getting to chat some actual Blue Jays news with you. We'll do it again on Sunday. For everyone watching, Long Toss, our Christmas edition, it is taking place Sunday. We're going to have the whole panel, the whole crew together. We'll be live on YouTube. Please join us 6 Eastern till 8 Eastern. Chime in on YouTube and we will release that on audio. So wherever you get your podcast, Sunday night after the show. Everyone take care. Thank you very much. Jen, thank you so much for joining.
This was so great. I've been dying to talk baseball, dying to talk baseball. So
Well, we've been dying to hear your thoughts, so it all worked out. Thanks again. Take care, everybody.